Good evening all, and welcome. Are strange things going on in your home? If so, you may be suffering from poltergeists or ghosts. Be warned, your house being haunted is never a good thing and can have frightening and terrifying consequences. So get ready, because it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. When I moved into our current house, I was around 8. This was back in '05. I remember that we had this boring and very ugly front door. It was doubly annoying because the mechanism that locks the door in place was broken. You could continuously spin the doorknob in either direction and have it not open. So we took the mechanism out, and you would just need to push or pull the door in order to get it open. Now, I was about to head upstairs when I noticed that the doorknob was spinning. I pulled open the door to see who was on the other side, and there was no one. I closed the door and was about to turn around again when the doorknob continued to spin. This was only possible if someone was manually turning it. I opened the door once more, and there was no one on the other side. I stared at it in wonder when the door flew off its hinges and pushed my head into the corner of the wall. It split my head open, and I had to stay for several days at the hospital for a severe concussion. I told my parents that I just fell while holding onto the door when they asked me about it, because I knew that they wouldn't have believed me anyway. We had to replace the whole door frame, which we have today. Another story happened around 4 or 5 years later and involved my brother and I. Around when I was about 12, me and my brother were hanging out in the office room in our house. It was about 3 a.m. when we heard a bell. Not just any bell, but a tricycle bell. Just think of an average bike bell. We freaked the hell out because we were the only two in the house at the time. We looked around the house to not find a thing. The next night, I was alone in the office around the same time when I heard the small bell. I, scared out of my mind, used my glass cup as a makeshift weapon to defend myself as I patrolled around the house. When I got to the kitchen, the tricycle that I had when I was 8, that we sold at a garage sale before we moved into the current house, rolled across the floor. No one was downstairs at the time to roll it, or ring the bell for that matter. We still have the tricycle somewhere. Another story. So my mother works a maximum security prison. There was an inmate that tried to hang himself. She was walking in on him, and she pulled him down and performed CPR. She ended up getting his heart to start again, but the damage was already done. The man was brain dead. This traumatized her pretty bad, and she got minor PTSD from it. It was bad enough that she needed therapy. Fast forward about a year or so after the event, stuff started happening around the house. Papers would come flying out of our printer. Objects would fall over on their shelves, and the TV would turn on and off at random times. These events escalated until one night my mother woke up with her arm in pain. She looks over, and her husband is laying on her arm. She says, "Hey, wake up! You're on my arm." My stepfather nudges her arm some more. "What the hell? Get off my arm!" Now mind you, my mother had surgery on her arm in the past, and it's incredibly painful even to this day. So, she is in a lot of pain. She tries to push him off her, when she finally says, "Get off my arm, you're hurting me." At this point, my stepfather opens his eyes and turns over, so that all of his weight is pinning my mother's arm down. Except it wasn't my stepfather. This man had a tomato red face, black eyes, and a toothy smile that stretched to either ends of his face to his ear. Good. My mother proceeded to flip out and start crying to stop, and that she was terrified and to get off her arm. My mother eventually pries her arm out from under this intruder and runs downstairs. She wakes the kids up and takes them into the living room to prepare to call 911. My stepdad comes down to the living room, except he is himself. He is wondering what the hell is going on, and my mother is screaming, "Get out of my house, stay away from me and stay away from the kids." It was pretty intense. Eventually, my mother saw that it was actually my stepdad and calmed down. It was around this point that she decided it was probably time that they got outside help. So they called my step-grandfather. My step-grandfather's wife has a brother that is a retired priest, and he currently lives somewhere in Mexico. By calling my step-grandpa, they got his contact info and invited him up to the States as a sort of consultant. He ended up flying up and listening to our story. He ended up saying that he heard of paranormal things happening to people in his line of work, but never to the extent that it was happening to us. He ended up giving us the contact information of a female pastor that travels around and deals with this stuff. He described her to us as someone who was especially sensitive to paranormal phenomena. He told us to just call her, tell her that he referred her to us, and to invite her over. Nothing more. He was specific about not telling her anything about what was happening, and that, as soon as she steps foot into the house, she'll immediately start to spout off stuff about your house's history, people who have died there and the like. So we give her a call. My mother followed the priest's instructions, and as they were saying their goodbyes, my pastor starts yelling, "Stop! Someone is trying to talk to you. She's extremely angry. She wants me to tell you that you moved it, and she wants you to put it back where it was, right now." And then she hung up. So, it just happened that my family was having a garage sale at the time. We moved some of the more useless stuff to the basement. One of these were these dolls. Now, these weren't just any dolls. These were vintage dolls from when my great-grandma was a girl, before she passed away. She was extremely adamant about my mother inheriting them. She was definitely the type of person to get angry over something like moving her possessions somewhere. As soon as the pastor hung up, she knew exactly what the pastor was talking about and moved the dolls. Now, the thing with the pastor didn't quite work out. On the day that she was supposed to visit, the pastor forgot our address and phone number and looked on her phone to contact us, except all of our contact information was erased. We ended up calling her later that day, gave her our number and address again, and she said that she was more than willing to still come over. At this point, she got into her car and it wouldn't start. She called a towing company to try and get to the shop so that it could be fixed, except the tow truck got into an accident on the way over to her house. Suffice to say, these were a coincidentally, or maybe not, long string of bad luck. so she was never able to come out. So since that didn't work out, we went to a different source for help. We called a paranormal investigation company that is local to our area. It was an interesting experience, to say the least. They came over and spent the night. They split up into groups and investigated a different part of my house. They had cameras, and these recorders that supposedly picked up on super low frequencies. One of the things that they caught floating somewhere in our guest room, as well as several orbs. They found a whole bunch of stuff on the voice recorders, and they interviewed, or so they say, 4 different entities. They identified a young girl, an older teenager, and a woman by the name of Lorelei, and a man named Frank. Now this caught my mother's attention, because it just so happened that the man that my mother resuscitated was called Frank. Upon more investigation, the man said that he liked my mother and hated my stepfather. That was about all that happened with that. For a while, the paranormal investigators became kind of famous within their community because they got a lot of evidence. So around this time is when I took some leave from the Navy and came back home. It was very quiet while I was there, except for one night. I was sitting in the living room reading when I felt like someone was watching me. It got so bad that I actually went outside with a flashlight and started looking through bushes because I was convinced that someone was stalking me. It ended up being nothing, and the feeling went away after a couple of hours. Fast forward to a couple of months ago. My uncle's childhood best friend, that we hadn't talked to in many years, stopped by for a barbecue. He had a new girlfriend. As soon as my family friend and his girlfriend stepped through the door, the woman stopped abruptly and asked my mother, "How many do you have?" My mother said, "I have 5 children. 4 are from me and the other is a stepdaughter." "No, that's not what I meant," my mother said uncertainly. "We have 4 ghosts. A little girl, a teenager, a woman, and a man." "No, you have at least 2 men. Because I have 2 brutes that are currently screaming in my face and telling me to get out." My mother and her had a very long conversation. Now, I would take what I'm about to tell you with a grain of salt. As soon as my mother told me this, I said, "No way. That's the most tall-tailed bullcrap I've ever heard." But you never know. Maybe I'm wrong. The woman told my mother that she's always had the ability to see ghosts all of her life, among other things, such as telekinetic abilities. She used to shatter light bulbs above her mother's head when she was a little girl. One day, her teacher was being mean to her. The next thing you know, the teacher is being lifted up off the air and pinned against the wall by some invisible force. She told us that she was then taken away by the government and had experiments performed on her to try and replicate the event. She said the government hadn't had contact with her in some time. Yeah, I'm not too sure about that last part, but whole sensitivity thing was obviously pretty consistent with our experiences. Something else that she told us was that the whole land around us was still haunted as hell. She said that the neighbours across from us have nothing less than an infestation, and she had never seen anything like it. She ended up leaving, and all of the paranormal events stopped. She later contacted my mother and mentioned that the 2 men that were shouting at her left with her, because they found out that she could see and hear them. They started messing with her by hiding her stuff under her bed and knocking things over. She told us that she could get rid of them though, and since then it's been quiet. No problems except for this one time that my mother was alone in her room, when the spring door stopper started randomly vibrating side to side. Not in the, oh, there must be a big truck that just shook the house kind of way. More the, this was someone pulling that thing to its full range of motion and letting it go, as if someone was playing with it. My mother remembered the little girl ghost that was at the house and said, "I know you're there, honey. It's okay if you want to play a bit. You can stay here as long as you're not mean." And that was that.
Thank you guys for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more videos.